So, before I begin today's podcast, I want to direct everyone over to the Finn Sterling channel, FINNSTIRLING. He's got a new video. It's 8 minutes 36 seconds. Pretty concise, pretty jam-packed. If you like the shorter videos, go check out Finn Sterling. Link in the description below. We've got a Nicholas R. Gilvey article today. The Accelerationist Yang Gang. The memes are in, boys. It has been decided that we'll enjoy our 1,000 monthly neat bucks and government-mandated Chinese waifus while playing Fortnite. In the meantime, the world's unpleasant tasks will be handled by robots. Sounds nice? That's what our new utopia will look like under the wise guidance of Chairman Andrew Yang. Heralded by that most jacked of manlets, Joe Rogan, Andrew Yang has burst onto the scene with his proposed Universal Basic Income, UBI, awareness of the plight of white America, and ideas regarding post-industrial society. Also, from what I can tell, he's going to crack down on Silicon Valley bigwigs and make them kiss the ring and pay their dues, which is long overdue. Mercantile dorks like Zuckerberg and Bezos have been led to believe that they're the biggest guys on the planet in the face of state weakness in Western countries. Think of nerds acting like they own the football field while the jocks are hungover from last night's kegger. Yang has promised, in so many words, to institute a program of sobriety among the jocks and suspend Zuckerberg and Bezos from the lampposts by their underwear. Sounds nice? It's a nice dream, I'll grant you. For what it's worth, I think Yang is of pure heart and intention, but UBI doesn't work, and even if it did, it wouldn't do diddly squat for the plight of white America, nor would it save America as a nation, as Yang believes. That's because there's no saving America. His dreams of robot workers are nothing new. Oscar Wilde had a similar idea back when my grandfather's grandfather was just a baby. Wilde proposes an early version of the fully automated luxury space communism of mimetic fame. Of course, if one reads the Wilde essay after having been awakened to the fundamental nature of men, one can see and feel the disgust of an aristocratic aesthete toward the crassness of bourgeois society, complete with nose held aloft and paternalistic urges to protect people from the odious merchants and moneylenders. Wilde lacked the frame that would have given him a complete picture, which I suspect is the natural state for a man who paid 10 times the amount to his dress than what he did to his work. You'll find critiques of UBI and automated socialism in other places. That's not the point of Yang's campaign, really. The memes will play up this aspect, but I believe that at the heart of it, Yang memers are actually repudiating Americanism. The usual suspects will kvetch about how UBI and automated socialism are bad and constitutes hamburger theft, how stuffing Bezos in his own locker is an assault on free markets, how pantsing Zuckerberg in front of the girls is not who we are. I can already picture the 3-hour-long Stefan Molyneux harangue, complete with poorly portrayed indignation that wouldn't pass muster in a 10th grade production of Romeo and Juliet. What light from yonder grifter's bald dome bounces? We know, we get it, we don't care. Essentially, meme lord and dissident right support for Andrew Yang is about accelerationism, about helping this enterprising young fellow put America and her global hegemony in the ground. Any right-wing support for Yang will inevitably run into alt-right, conservative, and libertarian opposition. This is for the very simple reason that they serve a different god, which is to say they seek to protect a different thing, make a different friend-enemy distinction, and ultimately have allegiance to a different concept. What really got me thinking in this way was considering the Proud Boys. They aren't racists, but rather they are Western chauvinists. What they want to defend is Western civilization, which is merely orthogonal to the white race. This is very silly, especially in light of research into the cerebral architecture, says GLV. There's a deeper problem with pledging allegiance to the West. Reading Spangler will give you an interesting perspective on the cycles of civilization. I think there is no doubt that Western Faustian civilization is nearing its end and that we are in the winter of the West. All we can do is reminisce about its past glories and pretend it's still great, as we currently see Trump doing in Venezuela. To be a Western chauvinist is to pledge allegiance to a dying civilization. In a sense, there's something noble in raging against the dying of the light. Like it or not, liberal democracy is the child of Faustian man. Spangler didn't use the word Faustian for nothing. Faustian man, conqueror of infinite space, reaching ever further into the void, fighting the unbeatable foe, dreaming the impossible dream. And what, dear friends, is less possible than bringing the light of civilization to the masses of the world? Let's not kid ourselves. The insanity of globalist egalitarianism is very much Western in origin. The Proud Boys don't get it. The alt-right doesn't get it. They're clinging to an outdated modality of Western being. We can mourn Western civilization after it passes, and there'll be much to mourn. But the death of the civilization will not mean the death of its people. The Romans and Greeks are still kicking around under various names, even though what Spangler called classical civilization has been gone for a while. Similarly, white people will survive the death of Western civilization, if Faustian man in his death throes doesn't destroy the white race first. Already, the global hegemon and her various satrapies are cracking down on every form of white identitarian activism and actively discouraging white reproduction. And yet we still see misguided whites trying to save this fallen angel. There is a great danger in trying to save a drowning man. The stronger he is, the more danger. In his panic, he might try to pull you down into the depths with him. Faustian man is already killing the white man. We can no longer risk trying to save him. We tried with Donald Trump and failed. And this is what I suspect Yang Gang wants to do. The hope is that Andrew Yang will put the West out of its misery through sheer stupidity before Faustian man snuffs us all out in nuclear paroxysms. Hopefully, Chairman Yang will throw us some money and put the screws on the plutocrats. So that's pretty much the essay with some alterations for the guidelines of YouTube and whatnot. And there are some comments and different conversations. I think it's very interesting. So what should we say about this? Well, to me, the only important issue is freedom of speech. I say this as someone who feels that any bad thing that's going on we can think of as soy sauce poisoning. So this is the analogy, soy sauce poisoning. Let's say a woman drinks 3 gallons of soy sauce and she dies. Let's ask why she drank that soy sauce. There are really 2 options. 1, she was ignorant and she was deceived. She was ignorant and she was deceived. So she thought the soy sauce cleanse was going to make her a healthier person. Instead, it killed her. And so, who do we blame in that situation? Do we blame the woman? No, she was ignorant and she was deceived. And who deceived her? Well, it could have been some deceiver on the internet. It could have been some deceiver on Instagram. Could have been a malicious 4chan troll, whatever. It could have been someone terrible, but someone deceived her. Someone deceived her, and she was ignorant, and she took the bait, and she died. And so in that case, I wouldn't say the soy sauce killed her, and I wouldn't say she killed herself. I wouldn't say it was a suicide. I would say it was a homicide by deception. I would say someone homicidally deceived her into believing that this soy sauce cleanse was good for her. On the other hand, there's another possibility. A woman might drink 3 gallons of soy sauce knowing full well what the effects are. She knows she's going to die. No one's deceived her. She's not ignorant. In that case, she's masochistic. She's abusing herself. She's committing suicide. And I have to ask, what led her to that point? I think most people who commit suicide do so possibly because of mental illness, but oftentimes whatever pre-existing mental illness there is, it's aggravated by environmental conditions. And I feel that as a society, if we are increasing the rate of white suicide, especially among older white men, if middle-aged white men, their suicide rate is dramatically increasing year by year, then that must mean that the environment is being purposefully changed so that this condition continues to worsen and worsen. I mean, we could argue that some level of suicide will always exist, and we can never get the suicide rate down to zero because some people are just born broken and they will inevitably commit suicide. But the fact that the suicide rate is now rising, and it's rising for one particular group, while it's not right, it's actually falling for all other groups. It's falling for blacks, it's falling for Hispanics, it's falling for Asians, it's falling for every group except white men. And white men, suicide rate is rising. So I have to ask, why is the suicide rate rising? Is it rising because of the ignorance of white men? Is it rising because white men have been abused and they've been driven to suicide? And I would say it's sort of probably a combination of the two. So when we look at suicide and a change in the rate of suicide. I'm not just talking about some base level, because again, we could suppose there is a base level of suicide that we just can't do anything about. No amount of therapy, no amount of help, no amount of counseling, nothing's going to fix it because some people are just born broken. Okay, let's assume maybe it's not true, but for the purpose of the argument, we're going to assume that. If the suicide rate is rising, we know that some of these suicides didn't need to happen. Certainly the suicide rate wasn't this high 50 years ago, so why is it so high today? And Andrew Yang is one of the very few candidates ever. I mean, I don't think Steve King has talked about the white suicide rate. The suicide of middle America. They won't talk about white people. They won't name white people. They're too afraid. Andrew Yang is the only candidate who will name the white man. He'll say, look, white people, they have the highest suicide rate that they've ever had before in this country. Obviously, we're not headed in the right direction. And I 100% agree with Andrew Yang. It's such a basic point. It's a point I've been making for a while. Andrew Yang's making the point. Trump won't make the point. Trump won't make the point. Trump will say, we have to go to war with Venezuela, Iran. We just need to totally wipe Iran off the map. All of these issues, he'll go to bat. And he'll be quite strong. You look at his Twitter. He's come out against Ann Coulter. He calls her crazy. He calls her wacky, and he insults her. He'll come out hard against his supporters, and he'll say we need more immigration than ever before. But he's not going to ever mention this obvious fact, which is to me the most dramatic fact. If we look at our social fabric today, it's not necessarily an economic thing. Of course, there are poor people in the country. We know we have economic problems. We know that the black community has poverty. We know that there are other problems. We know that women, there's gender inequality. We know there's all kinds of things that we could say, okay, well, this group is being oppressed, this group is whatever. But this is an issue which you can't solve necessarily in economic terms. White men are not the poorest group. And they're not, it's not like they're being abused in the way that women are being abused. There's not a pay gap. So all of these traditional explanations of how people are oppressed doesn't seem to be working. All the theories of why someone would be depressed, why someone would commit suicide. From the mainstream, we would think that black men must have the highest suicide rate because they're being attacked by the police, they're being attacked by feminists, they're being attacked from all sorts of angles. And yet they don't have the highest suicide rate. So what is happening here? This gets to a fundamental question of psychology and sociology, where we are, not just as Americans, but where we are globally. Where we are as humanity and all of the subpopulations of humanity. It's such a defining issue, and Andrew Yang's bringing it up. And for that alone, I have to say that the main issue when I look at the presidency is not changing the law. So Andrew Yang, if he gets elected, he can't say, here's $1,000, because that has to deal with the power of the purse. I mean, he could declare a national emergency or whatever, but that's limited. if we look at the American population, it's something like 350 million. We're going to look up the exact number. 325 million. So 325.7 times $1,000 equals, what's that? It's $325 billion, I believe. So, that's quite a lot. That's quite a lot. And actually, it might even be more than that. 325 billion. Yeah, that's quite a lot. I mean, let's put that in the numbers of Israels. How many Israels is that? Let's look up. If I look up aid to Israel, is Google going to censor that result? It says 8 billion. I think it's more like 30. Senate bill passes to enshrine 38 billion. Okay, so let's divide that by 38. How many Israels is that? That's like 9 Israels. So I don't know if we can pay for that. Certainly we could pay for 1 Israel, but to pay for the UBI, that would be like 9 Israels. That's a lot of Israels. So I don't think he can just do that through an executive order. I think that would require Congress and the Senate. And I don't think, Dianne Feinstein doesn't want the UBI. Nancy Pelosi doesn't want the UBI. Chuck Schumer doesn't want the UBI. So I don't think you get a majority of Democrats. You would get 0 Republican support. So as far as Andrew Yang, I think that he would basically be dead in the water as far as the UBI. So that's not an issue that I view it as an issue that might gather him votes. I don't think it would actually be an issue he would be able to do anything with once in office. Like Trump, I think if he could build a symbolic wall, he'd want to do it. By the way, I've maintained that the wall is useless. If you have a door in the wall and you increase legal immigration, the wall is useless. It doesn't matter. In fact, I would be fine with people pouring into the country if we had a different mythological orientation. And we could go into detail about what that would look like. But obviously, 1985, you had a majority of the immigrants into the country being non-white. Wouldn't necessarily be a problem if you had mythological institutions. Also, that would lead eventually to legal institutions that would maintain power for some groups and not other groups. If you have total egalitarianism and you bring in mass immigration, that fundamentally means disempowering the native groups. Whatever group happens to be in power, that's an attack on the status quo. So, the wall itself was never important. People got upset about the wall. I think that's stupid. I think, so here's my cutting through the nonsense and cutting through the memes about it, is that basically I supported Trump, and I still support Trump to the extent that he represents a free speech candidate. To the extent that he is someone who's pushing the boundary of acceptable speech, he's pushing the boundary of acceptable political opinion. I think he's still doing that, despite the fact that he's not accomplishing anything for me. Certainly has accomplished everything that Israel wanted. He hasn't accomplished anything for me. We all recognize that, and people who feel betrayed, I think, are just not very intelligent, or they're pretending to be less intelligent than they are. I think anyone who is intelligent looked at him before, during, after the campaign, first 9 months of office, up to the present day. At any point, if you look at Donald Trump, his history, his record, what he's said, what he hasn't said, it's pretty clear that he was never going to be able to unsink the ship, right? We have a very big ship here. It's America. America, the biggest ship. It's an unsinkable ship. But there's a huge hole in the ship, and the ship is going down, whether you like it or not, but it's going down very slowly and gracefully, and there's still people in the dining room, and they're eating, and they're having a party, and some people are having a brawl, they're fighting, and there's all sorts of drama going on in this sinking ship. And some people are like, hey, we should just jump off the sinking ship, and other people are like, no, we have to save the ship. So Captain Trump takes the wheel and he starts spinning the wheel, and I don't care how many times you spin it, you're not going to unsink the ship, Trump. So I never expected that out of Trump. Some people expected him to do the impossible, and they're very disappointed. They're mad, in fact, and they hate him, and they feel angry, and it's kind of like, when you... it's kind of like when a white mother expects her breeding partner of color to stick around, and then you have this nice Obama child, and the Obama child gets angry at his father. Dreams of my father. He writes a whole book, Dreams of my father, and he's so angry. He's like, Dad, why didn't you stay around? It's like, I could have told you he wasn't going to stay around. You just need to lower your expectations. You just need to have your expectations align with reality, and then you can actually work on things intelligently. The problem is this whole right-wing thing, this whole pro-West, right-wing, save America, America first, American nationalism thing was always predicated on this idea that you fool millions of people into getting excited about Trump. He's going to save the West. He's going to save America. He's going to save the white race. He's just a first step, guys. First, we'll get Trump in, and then we'll get Tucker Carlson, who's going to be more based, and then we'll just keep moving in that direction indefinitely, and it's going to be beautiful. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be wonderful. That was never a realistic plan. It's not to say I didn't support the guy, and it's not to say that I was against the memeing, but the problem is, do you want to be the kind of a person who every 4 years you get conned into supporting a candidate seriously believing he's going to fulfill his promises, or do you want to be the kind of person who's smart, who dedicates resources, emotional, because this is an emotional drama. I mean, they're burning the MAGA hats and whatever. People are getting upset. I don't think that's productive. I think if you're in a struggle, you can't just let your emotions rule over you. And the problem with these drama merchants, these merchants of drama, they puffed up Trump as this savior, this angelic savior, this knight on a horse who was going to save everyone, save everything. He was never that. That's never what he was. It's never what he could be. Now, I would have been happy to have been proven wrong. I would have been fine. Okay, you proved me wrong. Great. But the problem is we have a democracy. And so the necessity of democracy is you have to lie to people in order to get them so emotionally pumped up that they'll take 15 minutes out of the day to vote. That is the name of the game. That you have to lie to people to get them so excited, so enthusiastic that they want to vote for this guy. And that is what you have to do. I'm sorry, that's just the nature of democracy. If you don't like the game, you have to beat the game. If you're kind of stuck with this system. You can either go around and play a different game if you don't like democracy, but if you're gonna, and I say we have to be part of this game. We can't afford not to play this game. There are real political consequences if we don't play this game. If we don't have merchants of democracy out there puffing up people like Trump, then what happens is idiocracy wins. Democracy always becomes it is idiocracy, but it's power to the idiots. So if you say, oh, I'm too smart to vote, the distributist, as much as he makes great videos, he says, oh, I don't vote. Voting is bad or whatever. It's not principled. And then what happens? All these principled people stop voting, and it's idiocracy. So, I have to practically support. I'm going to vote for Trump. You should vote for Trump in 2020. But you should do so dispassionately. You should do so intelligently, because this idea of we're just going to get so emotionally riled up, we're going to be so passionate that we're going to just win through the will, the triumph of the will. We're just going to want it so bad and just put so much blood, sweat, and tears into this thing that eventually it's going to win. Well, that's not true. I'm sorry, that's just not true. If you have a bad strategy, it doesn't matter how hard you try, you will always fail. So what I would say, it's better to be a little more detached, a little more Buddhist about it, a little more realistic about it, and to vote dispassionately and say, okay, look, we have objective goals here, we have objective priorities, things that need to happen, things that we really need to work hard to prevent. So for me, it really all revolves around freedom of speech. For me, the Second Amendment leads to freedom of speech. The guns really only exist. I mean, people, it's a practical thing to prevent crime. Okay, well, I don't really care so much. If violent crime was the biggest problem, I mean, look, in the past, you look at Glasgow, you look at Ireland, you look at Scotland, you look at Paleolithic Europe, you look at extremely violent societies. But that didn't mean they were declining societies. That didn't mean that the boat was shipping, or the ship was sinking, I should say. What it meant was that it was violent, right? So violence has never been high. I've never engaged in violence. I don't like violence. Violence has never been high on my priorities, positively or negatively. I would tell people not to engage with it, but this idea that violent crime is the scariest thing and we just need to focus all our efforts on preventing violent crime, I think is silly. Not only is violent crime silly, it's maternal, it's feminine, it's all about preserving the body. So that's not what I'm interested in, preventing violent crime. That's not what I care about. I care about the discourse, I care about the ethos, I care about the mythology. And so, really, I think Trump is still the best person to shake up the ethos, to shake up the mythology, to shake up the discourse. That could change, I don't know, but right now it seems like he's the best person. But here's the thing, guys. Trump has the 2020 nomination. There are no Republican challengers. And so Trump doesn't need our support right now. Trump will need our support in 2020 if we want him to win. But what can we do right now? In 2019, what can we do right now that's going to help better impact the future of politics? There's all sorts of other things we could do that are not political, but politically, what's the best thing we can do right now? There is no alternative to the Trump candidate is all you got on the Republican side. So let's look at the Democratic field. Well, you have Kamala Harris, who I'm going to tell you, when Kamala Harris gets into office, here's the bill she's going to sign. It's going to be called something like the Protection from Incitement to Violence Act. And it's going to be very similar to gun control. And it's going to say, we respect the First Amendment, but you're not allowed to incite violence. And it's going to redefine incitement of violence. Right now, if you say, I want to kill Kenneth Brown, I want to kill a specific person, that is illegal speech. You cannot say, I'm going to kill this person. You can't make a credible threat. And it has to be credible, right? You can't just say, oh, in that moment, I just wanted to kill him. You have to say, I want to kill Kenneth Brown. I want to kill him, and this is how I'm going to do it, and you guys should help me and make it a conspiracy or whatever, or you advocate killing a public figure. That is illegal. You cannot credibly threaten a public figure specifically or advocate violence against. You can't say, we should go to Kenneth Brown's house, we should firebomb it, we should beat him up and do all sorts of terrible physical violence to him. You can't do that in a credible way. You can't advocate it. If you have a large program, if you have a large platform, you can't say, here's his address, I think someone should go to his house and kill him. You can't do that. That is illegal. You can't do it. So that's currently how we view incitement to violence under the First Amendment. But if you say something like, hey, currently, or, in the past few years, we've been bombing Syria, why didn't we bomb Israel? That's a question. That's like a rhetorical question. It's not advocacy or anything. I don't advocate any violence, but that kind of rhetorical question could become illegal under Kamala Harris. And you can see all kinds of situations where people sort of talk about nations or groups of people, and they say, something like, well, the Muslims castrated their black slaves. Why didn't Americans do that to their black slaves? Asking kind of rhetorical questions. What's going to happen with Kamala Harris and her new bill, which people aren't talking about because, this isn't necessarily something they want to project out there. But to me, this is the obvious. This is, if I was Kamala Harris, this is what I would do. A bipartisan bill. and it would be called, the act to prevent incitement to violence, or something like this. And what it would say is it'd expand the current definition. The current definition is a credible threat against specific persons. So if you credibly threaten specific persons, that's incitement to violence, you can go to jail. Currently, if you say, why didn't we bomb Israel? Why didn't we castrate the slaves? That's not a credible threat of violence against specific persons. And you can say a lot, there are memes on the internet that I don't support. I don't support this violent rhetoric. But what I'm saying is that the expansion of the definition of incitement is going to lead ultimately to banning hate speech. This is the slippery slope. This is how it happens. This would, again, if I was trying to ban hate speech, if I was trying to censor people's ideas, the first thing I would do is I would expand the definition of incitement to violence. I would expand it from simply being about credible threats against specific persons to non-credible threats against national classes, against people on the basis of national origin. And, this isn't going to have Republican support. Well, the way you make it a bipartisan support is you call it the act to prevent incitement to violence against the nation of Israel and our allies, or something like that. You throw in the nation of Israel in there, and all of a sudden it's got Republican support, it's got Democratic support, and all of a sudden anytime someone brings up casually the concept of violence against a national class, which again, I never advocate violence, but they're going to do that as a first step, and once they have that, they're going to normalize the concept of making hate speech illegal. It's going to be a stone throw away. That's the first step. They did the same thing with gay marriage, right? So the first they said, we don't want gay marriage. We're not going to destroy the institution of marriage. We just think that it's not cool how gay people get blackmailed into spying for the Soviet Union. So let's just take sodomy off the books. And who cares what they do in the privacy of their home? Of course, it's not publicly acceptable, but in the privacy of the home, we shouldn't hunt them down and blackmail them. And that was how it started, and now we know where we got today. But there were many different steps in between decriminalizing homosexuality and then eventually the state where we are, the bake the cake. Sargon of Akkad says, you have to bake the cake. Why don't you just bake the cake? So that's now where the moderate right-wingers are. They're on the bake the cake train. So that progress happens in a series of calibrated boil the frog type steps. And that's what Kamala Harris is going to push. Now, you can make the argument that Andrew Yang is going to push the same thing. But here's the difference. Andrew Yang has gone on the Joe Rogan podcast, and Joe Rogan hosts Alex Jones, and Alex Jones was censored. And so when you go on the Joe Rogan podcast, I can't ever imagine Kamala Harris going on the Joe Rogan podcast. Maybe it happens. And I'm not saying Joe Rogan's a great guy or anything like that. I'm just saying that even Trump hasn't gone on Joe Rogan. Trump went on Alex Jones and so there's a network there where they're anti-censorship. Joe Rogan is at least nominally more anti-censorship than Kamala Harris. So what I'm saying here is that if I had to choose between Andrew Yang and Kamala Harris, we all know who we would choose. And so that's why it's important, I think, at this moment to support candidates like Andrew Yang, because Trump doesn't need support. He is the Republican candidate. Now, once it's Trump versus Yang, I'll vote Trump. But I would rather have it be Trump versus Yang than Trump versus Kamala. Because if it's Trump versus Yang, I say, well, if Trump wins, then here's the pros, here's the cons. If Yang wins, here's the pros, here's the cons. If it's Trump versus Kamala, it's like, well, if Trump wins, I might not be hunted down as a Russian agent. If Kamala wins, I gotta leave the country. Because all of a sudden, all of George W. Bush, remember George W. Bush, such a great president. We love George W. Bush, such a great conservative. Remember when he created the NSA and the TSA, and he created all of these alphabet organizations to expand the deep state and to increase the power of the government to just label you, oh, you're a terrorist, you're an enemy combatant, you work for Al-Qaeda, or you're a propagandist. They would say, oh, you haven't committed a terrorist attack, but you're a propagandist for terrorists. And that's what they're going to start doing, is they're going to say, you're a propagandist for white nationalism. They're going to label white nationalism a terrorist ideology. It's been done before. Trump actually took away a lot of funding that was targeted against white nationalism, labeling a terrorist organization, a terrorist group, whatever. He took away a lot of funding toward that, which was a positive thing. Because to me, look, even if I'm not a white I can cry all day. I can say I'm a left-winger, which is true. I'm a liberal, which is true. I can do anything. I can say, well, I'm not white because whiteness is a social construct and I care about values. I don't care about your ancestry. Look, I can play this game all day. We all know where it ends up. It all ends up with Gavin McKine's getting deplatformed, Alex Jones getting deplatformed. We see what happens to people who just say, look, I'm all about the values. I don't care about, I'm a left-winger, I'm a liberal, I'm for free speech, I'm a classical liberal. We see what happens to Sargon of Akkad. We see what happens to these people. So that's not a winning strategy, because all you're doing is you're just playing the game where Kamala Harris is advocating that white men get the entire phallus removed, and then, Alex Jones comes along and says, no, just make it half the phallus. And, then Gavin McKine's comes along and says, okay, you can have the tip of the phallus, but you can't have the rest of it. And so, then Joe Rogan, and, you have different degrees of phallus removal. And I'm saying, like, hey, just don't touch the phallus. Just don't remove any part of it. And it's actually crazy. What was it? Gwyneth Paltrow? Foreskin. I don't even know. Foreskin cream. This is terribly disgusting. But the baby foreskin facial is a real thing. BostonMagazine.com. Several beauty products contain baby foreskin cells. QZ.com. Is Oprah supporting the harvest of baby foreskin? Vice.com. Novaglan. Is baby foreskin the key to youthful skin? HuffingtonPost.com. Wow. Okay. So I think it's all a prank. I think it's a troll. I don't think that people would ever use foreskins in a way that was, weird. I don't think anyone would, suck on, a baby's, chopped off foreskin. I don't think anyone would ever put their mouth on. I think that's a crazy conspiracy theory. I don't think it really exists. I don't think you should investigate it. I don't think you should research it. I think, frankly, if you research these kind of things, you're probably secretly gay, you're a bad person, you're immoral, you're basically Satan, and the government should declare you a terrorist and a Russian agent, and they should do terrible things to you. They should put you in Guantanamo. They should treat you like Osama bin Laden. They should end up finding you in a little spider hole somewhere, and they should just execute you by hanging or something. And I don't know, man. There's some very weird stuff out there. So probably don't look into it, because I think Oprah is pranking us. I think it's probably all an elaborate troll. I think it's like The Onion. I think this is a story brought to you by The Onion. Here's TheGuardian.com. I tried the foreskin facial treatment. So, yeah, I mean, personally, I think it's all a hoax. I don't think it's real. I think it's just a troll. I think it's an Onion thing. I think the right-wingers got trolled again, and it's not real, and it's fake. And, yeah, you shouldn't look that up. Especially not on Google image search. Okay. For real, though, don't do that. It's the things I do for this podcast, you can't even begin to imagine. Okay, so we're back on track here. What was I even talking about? Okay, so Kamala Harris, she's going to make speech illegal. She's going to chase down people. And look, again, I have real actual disagreements with white nationalism, with the right wing, with Western chauvinists. I have disagreements with these people. I think they're on the wrong track. I think they're doing the wrong thing. I don't agree with them. But I also don't agree with this America First, alt-right thing. And I'm looking at the situation, and I'm seeing that there's a symbiotic relationship between the extreme far right and the mainstream Democrats and Kamala Harris. They rely on each other in a way that mainstream Democrats actually increase. People like Hillary Clinton was the best evangelist for the alt-right that there ever was, okay? So in a sense, the alt-right depended on Hillary Clinton, and then Hillary Clinton relies on the alt-right as a boogeyman to attack conservatives. So there's a symbiotic relationship there. And again, that's not necessarily an ideological argument or a logical argument against them. It's just a situational fact on the ground. And so Kamala Harris is going to use white nationalism, this boogeyman, and the boogeyman of Russia, to attack people like me. Now, is she ever going to catch me before I, escape back to my Arctic hideaway, my Arctic secret base, my lair? I don't know. We'll see. It'll be a little fun test, to see if I go to Guantanamo for spreading, pro-white memes, if that's becomes an offense in the reign of Queen Kamala the First. It's questionable. But, I don't even want to go down that road. I don't even want to try. I don't even want to entertain the idea, frankly. I mean, we all have to have our plan Z at the end of the day. When everything else fails, you have to have a plan Z. So I advocate people having the emergency fund, having contacts in foreign countries. I advocate all of that just because you never know when they're going to start declaring American citizens to be terrorists, and when they're going to start, basically taking drones and assassinating American citizens. It happened under Obama. We know it's going to happen. It probably happens under Trump, and we don't know about it. It's probably going to happen again. So, you just have to be prepared for these things, of course, but I'd rather not go there. I'd rather we just elect Trump in 2020. Or, if it comes to it, I'd rather have Andrew Yang than Kamala Harris. Or I'd rather have Tulsi Gabbard than Kamala Harris. But it looks like most of the meme energy is going behind Andrew Yang, not Tulsi Gabbard. I'd love to see an Andrew Yang paired up with Vice President Tulsi Gabbard. I think that would be a great combination. Again, it's not that I agree with them on a lot of issues. I disagree with them. I just think they're better than Kamala Harris. So I'm saying, look, you can't, there's no other Republican. It's Trump or bust. That's it. So we can't change that field of candidates on the Republican side, but we can impact who is the Democratic candidate. Also, we know, I think Bernie was a spoiler. I think because Bernie was such a strong candidate, that I knew plenty of guys who said, I hate Trump, but the way that Hillary screwed over Bernie Sanders means I could never vote for her. I can never vote for Bernie. I could never vote for Hillary. And I talked to so many people in 2016 who were telling me over and over again, I am a Democrat, I voted for Bernie, I hate Trump, but I simply cannot vote for Hillary. And what I hope happens is that people like Andrew Yang, people like Tulsi Gabbard, and it looks like it's going to have to be Andrew Yang, and perhaps Bernie, I don't know what's going to happen with Bernie, but really, the mainstream is going to put their support behind people like Kamala Harris. And I hope we can sabotage Kamala Harris by strategically supporting her opponents. Her opponents are not Donald Trump. Her opponents right now are Bernie Sanders, Andrew Yang, Tulsi Gabbard. These are the opponents of people like Kamala. So there's basically two wings of the Democrat Party. And I would rather have Ilhan, the heroic Ilhan Omar, I'd rather have her, peace be upon her, I'd rather have her be president than, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Madeleine Albright, Kamala Harris. Let's shake things up a bit. Let's shake things up. Because I'm not here to save Western civilization. I do want to save freedom of speech. I do want to preserve it. And we all have to be prepared for the day when we lose our freedom of speech. I think that's inevitable. I think Trump could win in 2020, but then Democrats take back the presidency in 2024. it's eventually going to happen. Hate speech legislation will be passed. But what I'm saying is that we should ride out the last drops of hate speech, or that's bad phrase. Don't quote me on that one. We should, because I don't promote hate. I'm not a hateful person. None of this is hateful. What I'm saying is we need to ride out the last drops of free speech that we have. And it could be 2 more years, or it could be 1 more year. You know, if Kamala Harris gets in, I guess she would get in 2021 is when she would be inaugurated. So 2021 could be 2 years. It could be 4 years. It could be 10 years. I don't know when it's going to come, but free speech will come to an end. And at that point, you might have to move countries. You might have to become very secretive about what you do to avoid going to Guantanamo or getting droned or whatever it is. There's a lot of different possibilities. I can't foresee all of those. But I'm saying that if we can maintain freedom of speech as long as possible, that's going to help us prepare for what's coming next. I think if freedom of speech ends tomorrow, or say in 2 years, that's going to be bad. That's going to be bad because to me, everything is about mythology. Everything is about the language that we use, how we view things, our perception of the world. And so by making some ideas illegal and by preventing the spread of certain ideas, we've shown that censorship is effective. Okay, there was this idea that, if you censor something like prohibition, if you make alcohol illegal, people are just going to want to drink more alcohol. And if you make a certain idea legal, people are just going to love it more. That's not actually how it works, guys. Sadly enough, that's not how it works. If our enemies kill us, then we win is not true. Justin Trudeau is not correct. If our enemies censor us, we don't win. If our enemies censor us, they win. So I don't support this I don't support accelerationism. The thing about, I read this GLV article just because I like GLV. I like his name, I like his articles, and I think he made some interesting points about the West. We shouldn't support Western civilization. Whether you're a Eurocentrist or not, I think we have to understand Western civilization is over. Something new is going to have to come, and I'm very interested in that new thing. So in that sense, I'm an accelerationist. But in terms of freedom of speech, I'm not an accelerationist. I don't want to be censored. I don't want to be censored for my ideas. That's something I very passionately believe in, and I think other people should understand the importance of this. If you have no way to express yourself, you have no way to communicate your ideas, you have no chance. There is no plan B. There is going to be no, if they take away our First Amendment, we're just going to rise up with our guns. We're going to have a civil war. It's going to be 1776 all over again. I'm a gorilla. I got red blood. Yeah, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. That's a failure. And if you believe that, please leave. Please go elsewhere. Don't watch my videos. Stop watching my videos. You're not allowed to watch my videos. Please do not save. Please go watch someone else's videos. Go watch, some prepper survivalist videos. Go watch Alex Jones, because I don't agree with that. That's not going to happen. And I could have a little debate. You can post your little comments. Give me some argument. Don't post Jocko Willink. Okay, the number one enemy of this podcast right now is Pagan Blood. Pagan Blood, you are the number one enemy of this podcast. I declare fatwa upon you, a non-violent fatwa, a spiritual semantic fatwa against Pagan Blood, and all of this nonsense that he keeps pushing on my channel about, you need to watch the Jocko Willink podcast. The Warriors are going to retake D-Day, and this is ridiculous. It's sad. It's terrible. It doesn't belong on this podcast. Certainly doesn't belong on this channel. So leave the channel. Stop watching the videos. You're not welcome. I don't like you and you're not my friend. Stop. Seriously. It's terrible. This warrior ethos, these warrior ideas, they're not going to work. Once the conversation stops, you're done. And I'm going to say, look at the Jewish people. See, this GLV article, listen to what he's saying. He's saying there was a Western civilization. At the core of the Western civilization was this European people. And then Western civilization is collapsing, but European people can still survive. Let's look into history. The Jewish people had a Jewish state. They had kings, they had leaders, they were militarily successful. Then the Greeks came. Now the Jews fought back. They had the Maccabees. Then the Romans came. And ultimately, at some point, out over hundreds of years of struggle, they fought at Masada. You can go to Masada. And they all died at Masada. Every man, woman, and child. They all killed themselves, or they killed each other in a complicated suicide ritual. Because they said, we're going to die as warriors, Jewish warriors. And you look at that, and you understand that Jewish civilization, if we can call it that, lost its state power. It lost its military power. And it had to go into a completely 100% mercantile priestly state of being. There was no other option. They could no longer resist. First they resisted the Greeks, then they resisted the Romans, and ultimately the Romans defeated them, and they tore down the Jewish temple, and they put Zeus in the Jewish temple. It was a humiliating defeat. It would be like if they put Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill, or Mayer Rothschild on the $20 bill or something, right? It's this destruction, it's this defilement of the Jewish temple. And that's what's happening in America and Europe, especially architecture, art. It's a destruction of traditional European forms and a replacement with these basically humiliating inversions, if you will. And this is happening, and it's only going to happen more. They're going to tear down every statue, every artistic piece representing white masculinity. They're going to replace it with something degrading and humiliating, just as the Romans did to the Jews. And you have to understand that the Jews survived. Even though the Jewish state collapsed, Jewish military collapsed, the Jewish warrior class collapsed, everything, Jewish civilization collapsed, but the people lived on through the rabbinical system. All the rabbinical system meant is that you had a decentralized model, a priestly model, a mercantile model. And that's a proven model to work. When you have a Roman Empire that's coming down hard on you, and you can't resist them militarily, just as white people can't resist, the West can't resist NATO, can't resist the United Nations. Military, it's too powerful. You can't resist in that way, and so you have to focus on the priestly and the mercantile, and you have to be decentralized. So the most important rabbis in history were not those in Jerusalem. They were the ones in Spain, they were the ones in Ukraine, and Germany, and Poland. Those were the most important rabbis. So it's going to become, it's going to be a position, we're already getting there, where European peoples are going to be peoples without states. And it's already kind of that situation. It's already been that situation since 1985, since America has had a majority of non-whites as immigrants. That was a nail in the coffin. Or you could look at 1965, Hart-Celler Act as a nail in the coffin. Or you could look at 1945 as a nail in the coffin. But however far back, and we could go before that. We could keep going back as far as we want. We could go back to 1492 if we want to. We can go back as far as we want. We can go back to the Neolithic and the hunter-gatherers and whatever. But what I'm saying here is that when conditions change, when you're a dinosaur and the asteroids come and conditions change, you're done for. The interesting thing about human beings is, unlike dinosaurs, we can radically change our survival strategy. See, dinosaurs, they invested in this dinosaur strategy, and it failed them. They couldn't just evolve into, they could say, oh, whoops, guess being a dinosaur isn't so cool right now. Maybe being a reptile isn't the best strategy. Maybe we should be mammals. They couldn't just switch their genetics like that. But memetics is something we can change. We can change our mindset. We can change our evolutionary strategy. So when we're faced by these changing traditions analogous to that during the Jurassic, or the late, whatever, is it the Cretaceous? So dinosaurs, let's do some research on the dinosaurs. I want to know about the dinosaur. I want to know about the extinctions of the dinosaur, because I'm talking about them enough. So it was a Triassic-Jurassic extinction event. They first appeared in the Triassic. Their dominance continued through the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods. Evolved during the Jurassic period. Birds were the only dinosaur to survive the Cretaceous Paleogen extinction event 66 years ago. So let's see. The Cretaceous. I want a nice little timeline that shows me. Okay, so we have the Permian Triassic extinction event. Okay, so here we are at the Cretaceous Paleogen extinction event about 66 million years ago, and then we have little h for the Holocene extinction. Is that referring to humanity? The sixth extinction or Anthropocene extinction, current event, one of the most significant extinction events in the history of Earth. So this is very interesting. Extinction events. Western civilization is going extinct, and there's nothing you can do about it. So don't cling to the sinking ship. Don't go down with the ship. Evolve. Be like the mammal. Evolve and become something new. And look at the Jewish people, how they survived. They had no military capacity. They were totally wiped out. The Greeks, the Romans, they were just too militarily superior. And so what did they do? They became priests, decentralized priests, a decentralized religion with no central head, no pope. And they also, in addition to being priests, they also became merchants. So I would say that is the future. If you want to survive as a people, stop clinging to the state. Don't get up on Masada and commit suicide. It's stupid. You're not going to solve anything that way. So the sooner you can shift over, the more you can shift the earlier you shift your resources over, the better things are going to be for you. That's what I advocate. What does that practically look like? What does it practically look like? I don't know. Let's figure that out together. You tell me. What is it practically going to look like? But it's going to be decentralized. And that's why I think communication, freedom of speech is so important, that we have communication. And someday the internet might get shut down. We're going to have to use the Onion network. We're going to have to use the Tor network. We're going to have to use internet alternatives. Fine. But this issue of communication is so important. You look at Rabbinical Judaism, the way that it established itself, the way it maintained itself, the way it evolved, the way it gained power, was through communication between rabbis, the establishment of trade routes, this internationalism. And so that's what you had. You had a small population, no more than 1 or 2% of the total population of any given country, and yet it managed to create these international connections so that when the moment was right, when there was this war between Catholics and Protestants, they could insert themselves and say, hey, don't you hate those Catholics over there? Don't you hate those Protestants? Well, we can help you. We can lend you some money to help you in your war. And, we're not so bad. We're the children of Israel. We're the people of the book. We're not so bad. And that's the same thing they did in the Islamic lands, by the way. They said, you don't really hate the Jews. You hate those Sunnis over there. Or they would tell the Shia, you hate the Shia. So they would say to the Sunni and the Shia, you guys really hate each other. Us Jews, we don't have anything to do with it. And so that's basically how you're successful. Now, people want to cling on to the military strategy. They want to cling on to the warrior strategy. And I just see that as dinosaurs in the late Cretaceous period, just clinging on to their dinosaur way. And it's never going to work. You can't just push. Sometimes when the environment changes, you can't just push through to a solution using an old strategy. You have to evolve, adapt to a new strategy. And that can be painful, and that can be difficult for people to do, but no one's going to survive. The white people who survive are going to be cosmopolitan. They're going to be perennialists. They're going to be people who really are able to change, able to adapt. They have a liberal mindset. They have a mercantile mindset. They have a priestly mindset. These are going to be the white people who survive into the future, the white people who adapt and who pass on a lineage, who pass on that European inheritance. So you can be part of that, or you can say, no, I'm going to stand over here as a warrior. I'm going to fight a Masada. I'm going to fight to the last man. And you can get killed that way. And so if all you care about is existence, if all you care about is the survival of your genes, then this is the obvious strategy. Now, the particularities of it is obviously you can't just copy-paste Judaism. Because if you just copy paste Judaism, then you're Jewish, and then there's no distinct Europeanness about it. So obviously it's going to be something different. But again, it's going to be within that same class structure that I described, the merchant, warrior, and priest. It's going to be of a similar class structure, but it's going to have a different mythology. And so that's why I say the mythology is so important. We should have people who are fluent in Latin, who we can talk about Ovid, we can talk about the Aeneid. We should have people who are fluent in all kinds of European languages, who are fluent in Hinduism. This is why I'm so interested in perennialism. We should be able to look at all kinds of global traditions and be able to pick and take. I mean, that's kind of what Islam did. It took a little from Christianity, it took a little bit from Judaism, and it didn't copy Judaism, it didn't copy Christianity, but it remolded a syncretism of the two to create something new for the people of Arabia. And I think the people of Europe could do very well with that kind of syncretism. Take the best from a little bit of everywhere and make it into your own thing. So it's not about rejecting Christianity. I'm not here to reject Christianity, but I'm here to say that Christianity is problematic because at this moment it's been reformulated, it's been redefined, rebranded to mean basically anti-white stuff. And everyone sort of recognizes that. And so you could work within the church and try to change that from within the church. I'm not saying that's impossible necessarily, but I'm saying it possibly would be easier to start again from the ground up, just with something completely new, and put aside the baggage of Christianity, which is like creationism, support for Israel. You know, you have some baggage over there, and to start fresh and not to reject Christianity. You know, and I think if Scientology wasn't such a money-grubbing religion, if it wasn't all about stealing the money of rich people, which is basically what Scientology is, it's a cult that brainwashes rich people into giving away all their money to Scientology, which is terrible. But if Scientology had better intentions, you know, you look at they kind of have a Christian cross, but with some sparkly light coming out of it. And, you know, there's something, I'm not saying it's Scientology itself is a good idea. But again, you can see things like Mormonism. Again, I don't want to, and I think if people already join, if people are Jewish or they are Mormon, they don't have a problem. They already have their in-group. If we're trying to discuss, hey, what should we do? What should we believe? How should we comport ourselves? Already there is an assumption there that we haven't already found a solution in Mormonism, in Christianity, in Judaism, in Islam. If you already feel comfortable in any of the existing religions, then you just join those religions and you're quite happy and comfortable with yourself. The problem for me is that those religions, they all have their own baggage, and they all mythologically seem oriented toward, you know, the current regime, the current the global dominance, the direction of everything. If you insert yourself into any of these groups, you seem to be headed in the same trajectory as everyone else. It doesn't seem to be an independent force. All of these groups seem to be aligned with each other in a way that is, destructive toward any kind of maintenance or preservation of a kind of a European core, in my mind. And maybe it's impossible if we do identify the European as being a warrior, then maybe that's simply impossible given the class structure that technology has foisted upon us, that was foisted on by a changing, there's a cycle between the two. You can't really necessarily say that one exists without the other. That the merchant dominance led to technology, but then technology leads to merchant dominance, and so on and so forth. So, I'm still questioning, I'm still asking these questions. But it's an interesting thing to me. And I did have a valid criticism, not reading a lot of comments today. I did have a valid criticism of from Hector Quinn. He made a valid criticism. He said that I fetishize the merchant class. Sometimes you think you're thinking of one word, you say the complete opposite word. Let's rewind that sentence, start all over again. Forget I said that. Hector Quinn said, I fetishize the warrior class. I don't know how I make these Freudian slips. But it's a little bit crazy. And I think it was true. I think it's true that I do fetishize the warrior class. But I don't think that's special. I mean, that would be like saying men fetishize boobs and butts. They fetishize boobs and butts. And it's like, okay, yeah, we as men, we do that. And that's kind of normal, right? I mean, we're not like, if you go to a man and he's like looking at a woman and you're like, wow, you really fetishize breasts. I mean, some feminists will say that. They'll deconstruct masculinity. Oh, men, they're always fetishizing women's bodies. It's like, yeah, that's what men do. And so, yeah, I do kind of fetishize the warrior type, but I think everyone does that. I think that's what Hollywood does to an extent, fetishizing the ideal male type. So I think that's a legitimate thing that goes on. That's our ancestral calling. The fetish is not necessarily a bad thing. The fetish is really just an ideal, right? A fetish is just a pejorative for an ideal. So the fetishization of the warrior class, I think, is something instinctual to us. It's something that we want to fetishize. It's something that we want to idealize. So, I think that we should recognize the extent to which we do fetishize the warrior class. And even if we can't really, it's kind of like internalized white supremacy, internalized warriors. Maybe that's going to be the title of the video, internalized warrior supremacy. It's an important idea that we should recognize, we should understand. So it's something that we have to understand. It's important, especially in a democratic society, that if you have two men, one's more intelligent than the other, but one's more of a warrior than the other, right? One might be in a wheelchair, and the other one's athletic. Who's going to be more popular? Who's going to have more charisma? Who's going to have more leadership potential? So the warrior class, even though, in a lot of ways it's a castrated class, still has an impact on how we perceive others. Aesthetics. This is why I identify the warrior path with aesthetics. I think they're very intertwined, the path of aesthetics and the path of the warrior. And, So I think we should think about this, we should understand this, and we should investigate it, and we should pick it apart, and we should argue with it. And if we and people can say, oh, this is abstract. This is what Mr. Coolmug, who he calls himself a priest, which is funny. It's funny because he's all over the place. So he criticizes the concept of abstract ideas, and then all he does is criticize abstract ideas that I put forth, and he watches all my abstract ideas. So he it's like I'm attracted to these contrarian personalities like Maldor or Mr. Coolmug. They're just contrarian for the sake of being contrarian and endlessly critical, and I'm just fascinated by these people. Perhaps I see a little bit of myself in them as a contrarian myself. But is that we can reduce everything to you're just being a contrarian. You're just arguing for the sake of arguing. You don't have any real telos. There's no center to what you're doing. But what I would argue is that the Jewish people built their intelligence. It wasn't given to them by God. They had to build it through eugenic programs. And the way they did it is they said, okay, we have this text called the Torah. From the Torah, we're going to build the Talmud. It's an oral tradition, but we're going to write it down. We have rabbis who are going to argue using pilpul. And the better you can argue, the more well-esteemed you're going to be as a rabbi, the more money you're going to get, the more kids you're going to have. And the better mate you're going to have, the smarter Jewish female you can breed with, have smarter children. It was a eugenics program. And so really, when we talk through these ideas, in a sense, what we're doing is we're setting ourselves up for a eugenics program that is slated to increase our intelligence, our ability to think critically about ideas. I mean, that's supposedly the purpose of education. It's not to inculcate or to to put facts into your brain, because we can just Google those facts. Really, the purpose of education should be critical thinking. It should be teaching you how to learn things, teaching you how to criticize things, teaching you how to pick apart things and understand how they work. So that's kind of what this is. It's a process. It's not necessarily like, I don't have necessarily a Bible or printed out, here's the step-by-step plan. You wake up in the morning and you pray, and this is how you pray, and you pray to this person, and these are the words that you say. I mean, if that's what you want, if you want a dogma, go to the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church has a dogma. If you want a dogma, go to the Catholic Church. I'm not offering you a dogma. I'm offering you critical thinking. I'm offering you a discussion of ideas. I'm offering you a back and forth. I put forth an idea, you criticize it. I give you a rebuttal, you put forth an idea, I criticize your idea, and it goes back and forth like that. In this way, we become trained critical thinkers. We become more intelligent, and we actually fetishize the concept of intelligence. That's the pejorative sense, but we could also say we idealize intelligence. And getting away even from the concept of intelligence, we could say we idealize the priestly path. So there's multiple ways of looking at this, but I look at the history of scholasticism in medieval Europe, and I see the same kind of process of priests going back and forth and putting forth commentaries and exegesis and going back and forth and criticizing one another, reading one another, memorizing. This intellectual activity gives rise to a whole host of intellectual content in Europe that leads to Europe becoming this dominant global power. Thinking not for some practical goal, but thinking in the abstract. Abstract thinking, verbal intelligence is so important. I mean, Asians have a very high mathematical intelligence, but they don't control all the banks. Who controls the banks? People with high verbal intelligence, people with high abstract intelligence. So that is what I'm very interested in. This cycle, this process of building upon an ideal, upon a telos, going through it. And I'm very open. I'm a liberal-minded person. I'm a tolerant person. I'm open to ideas and suggestions, and I'm exploring, and I feel like, I'm an anti-dogmatic person, and I'm open to new things, and I don't want to slate myself into any one dogma, because the moment you do that, you sort of become less interesting. And we live in an age of the internet where information spreads more quickly than ever before. It's a mimetic age where you always have to be on the cutting edge, and the cutting edge is where it's at, and that's the intellectual interest and the intellectual excitement. So I don't know, you can criticize this, and you can say, well, we need a dogma. I'm saying there are plenty of dogmas out there. If you're arguing in favor of dogmatism, if you want a dogmatic religion, there are all kinds of dogmatic religions which already exist, which you can choose from. So I don't understand. If you want a dogma, there are plenty out there. Why haven't you already chosen one? You must not have chosen one because you feel that none of them are sufficient, none of them are adequate. And I think when you look at Christianity, Christ comes as a dogma breaker. This is why I like Christ, because he comes along and he says, you know what? Forget your dogma. We're living according to the living, breathing Holy Spirit. And all the time people come to him and they say, but Christ, but Jesus, the book says, and he says, forget about the book. Forget about okay, we're living according to the law. You want to eat some pork, go eat some pork. But Jesus, the book says we can't eat pork. You know what? Forget the book. We're going to live according to the Spirit. Now, of course, he references dogma, just as I reference dogma. I mean, language itself is dogma. The idea, every word that I speak is dogmatic in a sense, because I'm referencing established authority on what each phoneme has. Let's look up our phonemes and our morphemes. Phoneme. So the unit of speech that each unit that I say, each word that I say has some meaning. Everything that I say has some meaning to it. I didn't invent that meaning. I took that meaning from authority. So language and semantics, it's an authoritarian structure. It's just passed down to me. It's given to me. This is what this word means. That's what that word means. And for the most part, I don't change the meaning of words. Now, I try that selectively, maybe with the left wing and the right wing. But most of the 99.99 repeating of the words I say are authoritarian in nature. They're dogmatic in nature. There's something that's passed down. So I can try to be a non-dogmatic thinker. Still, so much of my thinking itself is dogmatic, to the extent that we are referencing words that have an established, agreed upon meaning. That itself is an authoritarian structure that we're referencing. So you can't escape that, right? But, when I look at rabbinical Judaism and I look at the evolution of it, and it has such a non-dogmatic quality to it, I think that is a survival strategy. I think that's something that has allowed it to survive and to adapt to so many different situations and environments, because it is non-dogmatic. You ask, a Jewish person, what's the afterlife? And they're like, I don't know. There's different opinions, and you can select whichever one you like. Some, if you read some Kabbalistic writings, they say you're going to be reincarnated. You read some other stuff, you go to Sheol. You read some other stuff, there's the resurrection of the dead with the Messiah. So you can pick and choose whatever you want. There's power to that. Now, if you have a non-dogmatic religion, you're always going to alienate dogmatic thinkers, or you have to have some kind of orthodox. You essentially have to have rabbis who are just going to tell you what to think and what to do and all that sort of thing. But to me, the essence of Judaism is an evolutionary aspect, that you're always questioning, you're always skeptical, you're always arguing, you're engaging in pilpul. And people can say, oh, that's disgusting, we should all just be dogmatic and follow the leader, and whoever is the strongest bodybuilder should be the Führer, and we should all follow that person in a dictatorship. That is the true European, Indo-European way. But to me, the essence, the success of the Indo-European peoples and the success of the Jewish people has at its root fundamentally an evolutionary spirit. That both the Indo-European peoples had a meritocracy. They were willing to put aside the nepos meaning cousin relations, meaning that which is close to you, that which is, where we get the term nepotistic. They were able to put aside nepotism in favor of merit and that which was evolutionarily successful. And the Jews, in a sense, have this evolutionary concept of, you just argue things out, and we can agree to disagree. There's the old stereotype, if you have two Jews in the room, you have three opinions. So at the root of Indo-European success and Jewish success, I see this evolutionary tendency, as opposed to, you look at the rest of the world, you look at Africans, you look at women, you look at Asians, you look at a lot of these cultures. Asians are very intelligent. I'm not saying they're not intelligent. I'm not saying they're stupid. But they seem to have a very dogmatic mindset. You look at Asian cultures, they seem extremely loyal to authority. They seem extremely authoritarian. In contrast to Jews, who are very anti-authoritarian, Indo-Europeans, who are very anti-authoritarian. So it seems to me that the people who rule the world are the anti-authoritarians, the non-dogmatic peoples, and the peoples who are kind of, for the most part, you look at the average Chinese citizen, they're kind of a serf, They don't have a lot of freedom, they don't have a lot of independence, and China, as a result, not a very powerful country. Now, that may change in the future. I don't know what's going to happen with gene editing and all the science they're doing over there, eugenics that they're doing over there. But things could change very quickly. But that would be a result of the Chinese adapting and evolving with new technology. So again, it seems to me that the groups which are best able to survive and thrive and dominate are those groups which are most evolutionary. Whether it's the Jews, the Indo-Europeans, or perhaps now the Chinese are going to do it. They're going to take the next evolutionary step toward transhumanism or whatever. It's all possible. But again, the principle at the end of the day of being evolutionary, of being open to new ideas, of being able to consider things and think critically and go back and forth and be intellectual and not be dogmatic, to be anti-dogmatic, I think that's a powerful thing historically. I think that was a powerful thing with the Neolithic. I think it's still a powerful thing today, and I think that's still going to be powerful going into the future. So if you want to be part of that, if you want to be part of the future, if that's your goal, you want to be part of the winning group, the right side of history, then you have to take this into account. If you want to be part of the beautiful losers, if you want to be a conservative, if you want to be a traditionalist, if you want to be someone who maintains their principles suicidally, and you're like, well, I would rather die on my feet than live on my knees, or whatever the statement is, however people want to frame this thing. You can make those arguments, and they sound very compelling, right? Because we do fetishize that warrior mentality of sacrificing yourself for your principles. There's something beautiful about that. And that there's something that we need from that, right? We do need people who are idealistic. We do need people who are not just materialistic and bourgeois, and people who are just going to follow the trend, because that's the attitude of sheeple. That's the attitude of someone who's just going to go along for short-term benefit, never looking at the long-term horizon. Someone, it's like when you lead a pig and you say, here, I got a carrot, and you lead them to the slaughter, versus the pig who's going to be like, I see that there's a guy with an axe over there, so I'm not going to follow the carrot. Or I see there's a cage that you're leading me into, so I'm not going to follow the carrot. That's the difference between a slave mentality and the master mentality, is whether you're willing to just take the short-term gain, the short-term benefit, or whether you have some patience and you're going to look at the time horizon and say, hey, I'm not just going to seize onto this hedonism, but I'm going to sit back and I'm going to actually scope out the situation, ask what is good or bad in the long term. So in conclusion, there was a live stream between Arvol and JF on the question of moral realism. It was moral realism versus moral nihilism. I look at morality at the end of the day as a survival strategy, and the success or failure of that strategy is going to depend on the environment. So if we're living in a Paleolithic time, then I would say, hey, the warrior mindset, the warrior strategy is a pretty powerful strategy. And that's really going to shape our moral code and how we think morally. And on the other hand, if you live in an internet age, then that's not going to be so much the case. So with that being said, is morality real? Is it fake? Well, morality to me is as real as our genes. Our genes, they determine our success or failure. We exist or we don't exist. And that's to a great degree determined by our genes. If we have the right genes, then we'll continue to exist. If we have the wrong genes, then we'll cease to exist. And with memes, it's the same thing. If we have good memes, a good morality, we'll continue to exist. If we have bad memes, a bad morality, we'll pass out of existence. So, in that sense, morality to me is real in the same way, like, we have a genetic code, we can look at the DNA, we can look at what's going on, we can isolate genes and look at polymorphic traits, or polygenic traits, I should say, and we can analyze that, and it's all real. Like, DNA is real. And I think morality is real. It's encoded in memetics, which is more fleeting because we're speaking to each other, we're typing at a computer, so it's more abstract, but I think it's real all the same. And I guess, to me, it'd be a question of, like, is math real? Is math real? Are numbers real, or numbers just, are they symbolic of, are they just something we use as a convenience? And that, it gets to a question of nominalism. And so, I don't know. I didn't even to be honest with you, people even, it's weird when you're at that 120 IQ range, then, like, you seem smarter than people with 100 IQ. But then you hear people with 140 IQ talk to each other, and you're like, I don't get it. It doesn't make sense. It's not relevant. It's almost like you sort of grasp at what they're talking about. And it's not even as if any individual sentence is incomprehensible. It's just your eyes sort of glaze over, and, like, I can sympathize with people. I can sympathize with people who when I talk, their eyes just sort of glaze over. I get it, right? I sympathize with you. I understand what it's like. So, yeah, that was my take. I didn't even But go watch it. Go watch it. It was most of the chat was just concerned with physiognomy, which I guess is like that's what people care about today. That's the most important thing. So take from that what you will. I think that's all for today. Thanks for listening. See you next time. Bye bye.